Hello there, my name is Jim Henson, and I'm a puppeteer. And I'm called a puppeteer because I work with puppets.
You know, it's funny. There's a unique way that certain characters from our childhood can tend to linger with us long after we've grown into adults. Chalk it up to nostalgia. We outgrow our toys, we outgrow certain TV shows, we even outgrow certain friends. But for some of us, there are a few characters that continue to linger on. They age with us. They become more meaningful, not less. And for a lot of people, like me, those characters had felt skin, googly eyes, and sometimes just said waka waka.
I'm going to explain about Muppet's meteoric rise in fame in both the world of entertainment and the field of commercials. Okay, just so you don't tell them the truth.
If you were flipping channels in the 1970s and stumbled on a pig karate chopping a frog, you probably didn't think you were watching the work of a serious artist, and honestly, that was part of the genius. Beneath the slapstick chaos of these exploding chickens and rubbery blue weirdos was Jim Henson. He was an artist, he was an innovator, and he was an idealist with one quietly radical mission: to prove that puppetry was more than just kid stuff. You see, he didn't just want to entertain children. He wanted to elevate the art of puppetry, to bring it into the cultural conversation along with animation, theater, and even fine films. And like comic books, which were long dismissed as these juvenile things until artists and writers demanded that they be taken seriously, well, Henson also believed that puppets had something real to say. And through a cast of flawed, hilarious, and deeply human Muppets, he said it. Now, before we go any further, I just want to mention that I'm not trying to do a biography on Jim Henson here. There are plenty of documentaries and short films out there that kind of cover that ground pretty well. But I do want to take a moment and talk about Sam and Friends. This is where Jim Henson really got his start.
Sam and Friends!
You see, Sam and Friends was Henson's first real commercial success. It aired in the 1950s, kind of like a short-term variety show, but it really wasn't much more than a series of musical skits with lip-syncing puppets. Now, despite that critique, it was wildly inventive. It had charm, it had timing, and a kind of homemade surrealism that nobody else was doing at the time. And perhaps most importantly, it had explosions, and I mean a lot of them. Sam and Friends was a financial success, but Henson did have some doubts about continuing with a career in puppets after he graduated from college. And so, armed with his degree from the University of Maryland and no idea what to do next, he decided to spend 6 weeks in Europe during the summer of 1958. Now, originally, the intent was to study painting, but once he got there, he found something rather surprising. Puppets were considered just as serious of an art form as a painting or a sculpture. Henson returned from his trip with a renewed passion, but he knew he was facing an uphill battle. You see, puppets have a bit of an image problem. Ask most adults what they think about puppets, and you'll get a slight smile and some mention of nostalgia. Jim Henson knew this, and it drove him nuts. He saw puppetry not just as a tool for communication, but as an art form in its own right. One that was capable of subtlety, of emotional nuance, and legitimate storytelling power. But the thing that made puppets so appealing to children, their softness, their simplicity, their immediate visual charm, well, these were the things that made them easy for adults to dismiss. The moment a puppet appears on screen, expectations shift. It's assumed the audience is under 10, the message is going to be spoon-fed, and the jokes are going to involve banana peels or bad puns. Okay, yes, there were bananas and bad puns, but still. Henson believed that puppets could do more and should do more. But to make the case, he had to work in a medium that the art world wasn't really ready to take seriously. And so he did the only thing an artist can do when their medium is misunderstood. He used it anyway, but he used it brilliantly.
There were two young college students, Jim Henson and Jane Neville. They got together with some little puppets, and they formed what people in Washington now know as the Muppets. We had them on our Tonight Show a few weeks ago, and they broke it up, so we're happy to have them with us today. Here are the Muppets.
Henson spent most of the next 2 decades working in commercials, talk shows, and various children's projects. In the early days, Henson often tested the boundaries of his medium on late-night talk shows. Appearances on programs like Ed Sullivan or The Tonight Show gave his characters room to stretch a bit. They cracked adult jokes, they poked fun at politics, and they acted like they knew more than they let on. There was always this layer of mischief going on, like the puppets were in on the joke with the audience, not just performing for them.
It's funny where the fantasy starts and he gets so caught up, you get caught up. I'm sitting here talking to a frog.
And you don't look at him at all. You just look at the animal.
I'm talking to the frog, and the frog gets steamed.
Yes.
Apologizing to a puppet. You know?
If Jim Henson had written a manifesto, it would have been fuzzy. He didn't need to write one, though. He built one, character by character. The Muppets weren't just a cast of slapstick puppets with funny voices, they were emotional archetypes, each one a living, felt-covered piece of Henson's worldview. And taken all together, they form a surprisingly complete portrait of the man behind the curtain.
Yes, indeed, but let's not be quite so formal. Why don't you just call me Kermit, and I'll call you, well, what would you like me to call you?
Let's start with Kermit. Calm, patient, often overwhelmed, but somehow still holding the whole thing together. He was the straight man in a world of madness. Kermit wasn't just the host of The Muppet Show, he was Henson's voice, literally and emotionally. You can hear Henson's soul in Kermit's sighs and his gentle way of asking everyone to please, please get it together. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't bossy, he led with kindness. Although I will point out that as his characters evolved through the decades, a more modern Kermit puts up with a lot less flack and tends to get a little bit more snarky when he needs to. I kind of like it.
Really? You know, maybe we should just change the national anthem to the Hot Pockets jingle. I mean, really? Really?
And then there's Fozzie Bear, the eternal open mic comic, bombing with gusto and praying the next joke lands. Fozzie is very insecure, and he's a creative who pushes through the fear because maybe this time he'll get the laugh. Fozzie is the embodiment of artistic vulnerability, with the courage to give himself permission to be bad as part of the experience that he learns from to become great. Miss Piggy is pure theatrical confidence, aggressive, self-promoting, utterly convinced that she's destined for stardom. But dig a little deeper, and you see someone who's desperate to be loved. There's an ego, yes, but there's also heartbreak. And she's the side of Henson that knew that the show must go on, even if you had to karate chop your way to get to center stage. Gonzo is Henson's weird streak fully unleashed. He's strange and proud of it. He launches himself out of cannons for fun. He falls in love with chickens. And yet somehow, he's deeply sincere. And that's Henson too. A lover of the absurd who always made it feel real. Gonzo is the spirit of every misfit who ever wanted to be taken seriously on their own terms. Dr. Teeth brings the funk and the swagger. He is the musician in Henson. He's the one that grooves with confidence and commands the rhythm of the room. Dr. Teeth and the rest of Electric Mayhem embody Henson's love of artistic boldness, the joy of noise, and unapologetic self-expression.
How would you describe your music? What is that? Is that rock or jazz?
Well, it's like catastrophe music. The head of my fan club is Nangora Sweater. Comes out of Dubuque, Iowa. You know, she's really fuzzy though, man. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Dig that fuzz.
Yeah.
Oscar might seem like the odd one out here. He's a grouch. But his permanent grumpiness has a kind of honesty to it. He's the inner cynic that Henson never really let take over, but also never really fully denied. And he's a good reminder that not all things are going to be pretty, and that's okay. Dr. Bunsen Honeydew and Beaker represent Henson's love for invention and experimentation. Two characters constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible, often with disastrous results. But there is beauty in that chaos. Bunsen is the overly optimistic genius, and Beaker is the consequence of that optimism. Now, together, they echo the creative process: trial, error, and the occasional explosion. Gentle, wide-eyed, impossibly tall. Sounds a little like Henson already. Big Bird embodies innocence. Not ignorance, but trust. A kind of pure-hearted openness that kids recognize immediately, and that adults, deep down, wish they hadn't lost. Henson knew that innocence wasn't a weakness, it was in fact a strength. Big Bird helps remind audiences, especially grown-ups, that it is okay to ask questions and to feel lost and still believe that the world can be kind. Even Henson's chaos characters, the Swedish Chef, Cookie Monster, the Count, they all have something to say. They represent the beautiful mess of collaboration, the joyful noise of people working together even when no one's totally sure what they're doing. Henson surrounded himself with oddballs, with dreamers, with eccentrics, on screen and off, and I like to think that was on purpose. His characters weren't polished, they weren't fancy, they weren't perfect, but they were alive, and in a way that most people and most puppets really weren't. Henson didn't just want puppets to be taken seriously, he also wanted them to be funny. And not just kid funny, but grown-up funny. And that meant embracing things like irony, satire, and the occasional off-color joke. It was risky. Not everybody liked it. One of Henson's more high-profile attempts at adult comedy came during a brief and awkward stint with Saturday Night Live. Initially, Henson and his puppets were a poor fit for the show, more a point of tension than collaboration. The writing staff didn't enjoy scripting for puppets, and the puppets weren't really well integrated into the format of a live, edgy sketch comedy, as it was known back then.
The writers on the 17th floor tied a belt around Big Bird's neck and hung him from my dressing room door.
But over time, that relationship evolved. Today, when the Muppets make rare guest appearances on SNL, they're met with applause, nostalgia, and a genuine appreciation. What once felt like a creative mismatch has now suddenly become a kind of pop culture reconciliation, a proof that the boundary that Henson tried to cross wasn't a failure, maybe just a bit ahead of its time. It wasn't slapstick, it wasn't parody, it was just something stranger. Not everybody was ready for it. This desire to elevate puppets beyond the nursery rhyme is part of what makes Henson's body of work so compelling and so significant. He knew Muppets could charm children, but what he really wanted was to prove they could charm adults also. Once the Muppet Show was a global hit, Henson could have stayed right in this lane, cranking out these merchandise-friendly characters, cashing checks, coasting on the felt. But he really wasn't interested in coasting. He wanted to explore, he wanted to invent and evolve. And that meant going places the puppets were never supposed to go. Fantasy, darkness, and adult themes. No, that's not what I meant. Take The Dark Crystal, a movie with no human actors, an invented language, and a completely original mythology. It was weird, quiet, visually stunning, and completely serious. Henson called it his most personal project, but in 1982, audiences didn't really know what to do with it. Critics gave it mixed reviews, kids were confused, adults weren't really sure it was for them. And that was kind of the point. Henson wasn't trying to make something easy, he was trying to prove that puppetry could build a world, that it could carry the same weight as science fiction, epic fantasy, or some other similar folklore. And then came Labyrinth. Equal parts fairy tale, fever dream, and David Bowie music video. It bombed at the box office, but artistically it was bold, surreal, and a good mashup of live-action, animatronics, and puppetry that no one else could have pulled off. It was a story about identity, choice, and illusion dressed up in goblins and glam rock, and years later, it became a cult classic. But in the moment, it was just another reminder that Henson was playing a long game, and it was one, unfortunately, that audiences might take a few years to catch up on. Jim Henson died in 1990. He was 53 years old. It was unexpected, and it was unfair. History has this strange way of producing the right person at just the right time. And Jim Henson was one of those heroes. He was a man whose gentle spirit, his technical brilliance, and his deep belief in humanity gave the world something it didn't even realize it needed. Permission to be kind, and permission to be curious. The tragedy of his death isn't just that he had more to say. It's that in losing him, we lost somebody uniquely equipped to help guide us through whatever it is that comes next. Someone whose medium, soft, funny, handmade, might be something of an antidote to a world that's growing more cynical, more hard, more disconnected. So what now? Jim Henson's gone. The workshop still hums. The characters still sing. And the man who made it all feel so alive is no longer here. And it's starting to grow easier to wonder whether we lost more than just a person, but we lost a kind of presence. And maybe not forever. History, as I said before, has a way of giving us who we need when we need them. Not always when we want, or even rarely how we expect, but again, someone shows up, an artist, a teacher, a dreamer who's armed with just the right kind of strange, beautiful energy. A strange, beautiful energy that helps us evolve. And maybe Henson was one of those. Maybe he arrived precisely when he was meant to. And maybe somebody else will too. Or maybe the world doesn't need another Jim Henson, but instead, people that were inspired by Jim Henson to carry the torch, to move to the next generation. And that's the real legacy. Not just the puppets, but the permission to care, to collaborate, to be weird and honest and vulnerable, and still be taken seriously. That's what Jim Henson stood for. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether it still matters, whether silly things like puppets can change the world, well, remember, they already did.
I'm glad you got that out. That anger can clutter your mind.
Thank you, Kermit.